I'll never forget how I spent Yom Kippur at age 20. I was living in Jerusalem for the year, and having only moved a few weeks prior, I didn't yet have any close friends. My roommates were with their Israeli families for the holiday. In Israel, the public transportation pauses during the Chagim, and I didn't live walking distance to any of the shuls. This was before the COVID pandemic, so virtual services weren't an option. I spent Yom Kippur alone for the first time. I cannot remember exactly what I did. Maybe I took a long contemplative walk. I probably fasted, but I can't be sure. The only part of this that has left a lasting impression is the pit that formed in my stomach upon realizing that for the first time, I would be spending the holiest day of the Jewish year, 25 long hours, alone. I felt pathetic. I felt nervous. I felt lonely. In truth, much of that year was an exercise in facing loneliness. I had decided to study abroad to deepen my Jewish identity and to prepare myself for rabbinical school, to explore a country I had visited before and loved. I never expected to feel such profound isolation. I struggled to make friends at first. I felt like everyone around me knew what they were doing. They were all having a great time, and I was floundering. I yearned for the embrace of my loved ones, to be with them for the gatherings and the milestones that they all seemed to be having together while I watched on from halfway across the world. I gained self-knowledge and confidence that year. I also gained newfound appreciation for the pain of loneliness. Ironically, I was not alone in my loneliness. None of us ever are. According to a 2021 Harvard University study, 36% of Americans, including 61% of young adults and 51% of mothers with young children, feel serious loneliness. 43% of young adults reported increases in loneliness since the start of the pandemic. About half of lonely young adults in the survey reported that no one in the past few weeks had taken more than a couple of minutes to ask them how they're doing in a way that made them feel like anyone actually cares. And these numbers have consequences. Loneliness is a factor in a whole host of other health problems, including depression, anxiety, heart disease, substance abuse, and domestic abuse. Research finds that lacking in meaningful social connections carries the same, if not greater, health risks as heavy smoking, drinking, and obesity. In Genesis, we read, "It is not good for humanity to be alone." Apparently, this is a timeless truth. I want to be clear that being alone and feeling lonely are two very different things. I'm actually someone who relishes my alone time, whether this be a relaxing night to myself, or a long walk around my neighborhood, or taking a solo trip to the beach. Being alone sometimes makes me feel like I can be my truest self. It gives me the space and the peace to recharge. And being alone is a very Jewish thing to do. It was Rabbi Nachman of Breslov who popularized the notion of hitbodedut, of spending time alone with God. He wrote, set aside time each day to meditate and pray alone in a room. Perhaps find some meadow and express your innermost thoughts, your prayers, your personal feelings to God. Our prayer services, like tonight, always have time for both communal prayer but also private prayer, because the Jewish tradition knows that being alone with God allows us to express ourselves in ways that being a part of a minyan cannot. That being said, feeling lonely is different. Feeling lonely means feeling isolated and not having an outlet to fully express ourselves. It feels like not being seen and not being heard, like life is happening around you and you're on the outside looking in. Feeling lonely doesn't bring peace, it doesn't bring space, it doesn't bring recharge. It brings heartbreak. Loneliness can be emotional, the absence of having meaningful relationships in our lives, even when it seems like we're surrounded by a whole community. It can be social, like not having enough people to turn to, or really missing that one special person in our lives. It can be existential loneliness, feeling separate from the world and not having meaning in life. Loneliness happens across all life stages, and it happens to everyone. Research actually suggests that the capacity to feel lonely is an evolutionary adaptation unique to humans. Perhaps loneliness motivated our ancestors to seek connection with other members of their tribe, and this would increase their chances of survival and of passing the tendency to feel lonely onto the next generation. Not only is it human to feel lonely, but our tradition teaches that God, too, sometimes feels lonely. To feel lonely is to be B'Tselem Elohim, to be in the divine image. According to rabbinic legend, God created the world specifically because God was lonely and was searching for a partner in humanity. Since creation, God craved this connection with humanity, and that is the impetus, we learn, for the building of the Mishkan, that portable sanctuary that traveled with the Israelites in the desert. We read in Exodus 25, "Va'asu li mikdash v'shochanti betocham," and let them make for me God, a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. The Mishkan provides a physical space for God and humanity to be present together and to connect for the first time. This is what makes the Mishkan a holy space. As God directs the Israelites to build the Mishkan, thereby easing loneliness through presence and connection, so too can we. 20th century Jewish philosopher Martin Buber wrote a guidebook of sorts for the power of human presence. In his book, I and Thou, he divides relationships into two categories. On the one hand, we have I-it relationships, and on the other hand, we have I-thou relationships. Being in an I-it relationship is about being perhaps physically present with another, but not emotionally or spiritually there. It's about treating that interaction as a transaction, that other as a thing. Think about how you might treat a cashier or a waiter. You might be nice to this person because you need something, but not because you genuinely care. I-it relationships are alienating. They leave us feeling depressed or distant from the others around us. And yes, they can leave us feeling lonely. I-thou relationships, on the other hand, make us feel like our fullest selves. They involve full presence. They involve being with another person, really looking them in the eye, really seeking to understand and validating their experiences. Think about the last time you really connected with a person, learned something about them that stopped you in your tracks, where you could just be accepted with them as yourself. Ultimately, Buber concludes, when two people relate to each other humanly and authentically, God is the spark, the electricity that exists between them. Just now we recited in our service, Al chet shechatanu lefanecha, for the ways we have wronged you deliberately and by mistake, and the harm we have caused in your world through the words of our mouths. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha, for the ways we have wronged you by hardening our hearts, and the harm we have caused in your world through careless speech. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha, for the ways we have wronged you through insincere apologies, and the harm we have caused in your world by mistreating a friend or a neighbor. All of these point to the simple sin of not being present with the others in our lives, not really making these people feel seen, not really making these people feel heard. Yes, being present requires time and attention in a world that is always demanding so much of us, pulling us in a million different directions, in a world that makes us feel like we are never giving enough of ourselves. Ultimately, though, being present is the kindest thing that we can do for another human being. It entails giving these most precious of resources, our time and our attention, resources that we can never get back, to another person. And it's important. It can make a profound difference in someone else's life, and it can enrich your life too. Martin Buber explains why in a later book of his, Between Man and Man. He writes, "In my early years, religion was for me the experience of exceptional moments. Regular life was about customary tasks, but religion was about illumination and ecstasy and rapture. It was an extraordinary event that taught me how wrong this was. One afternoon, I had a visit from an unknown student of mine, but I wasn't there in spirit. I was certainly friendly. I treated him politely. I conversed attentively and openly with him, only I failed to guess the questions that he didn't ask. Not long after, I learned from one of his friends, he himself was no longer alive, the real content of these questions. I learned that he had come to me not accidentally, but brought by destiny. Not for a chat, but for a decision. He had come to me. In this hour of his need, he had come to me. What are we looking for when we are in despair and we go to another person asking for help? Surely we're looking for a presence that lets us know that whatever happens to us, life has meaning and it has worth. Buber concludes, "Since then I've given up the search for religious experiences. The only mystery in life that is available to us is that which happens right here. Religion belongs to all moments. It is simply leaving all moments open to the possibility of dialogue." Yom Kippur is about considering how we can act better in the year ahead. With its majestic liturgy and its soaring music, which we have heard tonight, I know that the pressures of this day can feel immense. But I'm also here to remind you that Yom Kippur and Judaism at large, they're not about seeking perfection. They're about taking small steps to be better, and presence is a part of this. Presence is one of the simplest tools we have. Presence is one of the simplest tools we have to make humanity better, to enrich our own lives, and to ease the problem of loneliness in our world. What would it look like for all of us to recite Al Chet next year and think to ourselves, hey, I made a real effort to be deliberate in my actions. I tried to use the words of my mouth for good. I sought to open my heart to others, to use my speech with care. I spoke sincerely, and I gave them my time, and I gave them my attention. I gave them my presence. How might the others in our lives feel, and how might we feel more connected? One day, a few months into my year in Israel, a classmate and I decided to grab coffee between classes. I learned she was from Brooklyn and she had traveled solo in Italy for a month before starting our semester in Israel. She was quiet, she was sweet, she was smart. Her stories were interesting to me. I learned that she too was feeling lonely and a little unsure of herself. As the year went on, we spent more time together and we grew closer and closer. By the end of the year, we had so many adventures together. Today, she's one of my best friends. The friendship blossomed out of a decision that we both made one day between classes to be present with each other. And this made all the difference. To be human is to know the pain of loneliness. Yet as humans, we also have the power to do something. We have the unique ability to be deliberate with our time and with our attention, to make each other feel seen and make each other feel heard. to ease the world's loneliness. In this next year, let us treat each encounter as one ripe with holy possibility. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be so.